Okay, so a couple of articles as usual, and I'll just read some of these in no particular order, and then we'll get back into and hopefully complete our look at Ezekiel 38 and 39. The first one is entitled, and this is just been talking about what we just prayed about with Christians and others uh, coming under growing attack in the culture. And so here's an article entitled Conservatives, and I put Christians, that whether we're conservative or not, but oftentimes they use that term, they mean Christians as well, face dangerous new trend for speaking out, and that's becoming, quote, debanked. For David Bashan, cancel culture has plagued many aspects of American life, and financial institutions are no exception. JP Morgan Chase and Company has been accused by 19 Republican states of, quote, debanking, which is the involuntary cancellation of bank accounts, members of conservative or religious groups. With rising frequency, clients associated with conservative or religious beliefs are reporting. Did I bring my Bible? A report.
Glasses.
Oh, my Bible.
Oh.
Where?
Do you want me to go get you one from downstairs?
Would you?
Sure.
Oh, okay. Sure. Yeah. I don't know. Sorry about that. Yeah. Forgotten everything at one time or another. But that takes the cake. Uh,
Tons of Bibles.
thank you.
Oh, you need one of those things? Oh,
I don't know why it just suddenly hit me, but I'm looking, thinking,
something's next.
with rising frequency, clients associated with conservative or religious beliefs are reported being expelled from financial institutions, including Sam Brownback, former U.S. Ambassador for Religious Freedom and current head of the nonprofit National Committee for Religious Freedom. We just heard of way too many groups of entities, particularly religious associated ones, which is Christians, that have been canceled by the providers, and we want to start seeing some of these cases investigated. Boston, who is the founder and chief investment officer of the Boston Group, has made plans to confront JP Morgan concerning their alleged religious and political discrimination. The true controversy, as he sees it, is rooted in JP Morgan's refusal to entertain the discussion proposed. So there's a lot of that going on of things that just aren't right that we're not hearing about. The root of the issue, as Basham put it, is within the heart of, quote, woke corporate America. We've all heard that term, woke corporate America. The banks are still pretending to be neutral. That's a good thing. Now, I don't think they are neutral, but at least they're pretending. Other companies are just flat out admitting that they have no regard for people of faith or people of a different political belief system. So you wonder, with the progress and the way things are going, how long it'll be before, like, I don't know, this is a horrible incident, but, and it shouldn't surprise us, but I don't know if you read or heard about the 2.5-year-old child in North Korea who's been sentenced to life in prison, 2.5 years old,
For what?
life in prison,
Who would it be?
because they found a Bible in his family's house.
I did hear.
So
Oh,
a Bible in the family. That's how we have no clue how some people are forced to live. 2.5 years old, the rest of his life is going to be in a North Korea.
Put in jail too.
Yeah,
the whole
right, the whole
family.
family, including him. Can you imagine?
Oh,
But that's what's happening around the world. PayPal,
hear
quick,
that.
let's see. How should Christians react to being debanked, particularly if they aren't shareholders? I'm not going to get into all of that, but that's just one more example of what's happening. Hercules actor Kevin Sorbo, he does a lot of the Christian films, added his thought to Twitter posting, and PayPal got involved in this too. Isn't sorry, they're just mad they got caught.
Hmm.
No.
Another conservative influencer tweeted his warnings on what this policy would mean for those who speak out on issues of sexual orientation and gender identity considered discrimination. So, more I'm sure to come on that. Who knows what we'll be reading about this time next year. But things are happening very quickly. Here's one bombshell report claims along these same lines. Biden administration using taxpayer money to wage covert war on conservative Christian groups. And this is coming from Brent Bozell, if anybody knows who he is. He's head of the Media Research Center. You see him on TV quite often. Very straightforward. He's been around a long time. But Media Research Center president and founder Brent Bozell discussed the astonishing findings that the Biden administration is allegedly using taxpayer money to wage a covert war on conservative and Christian groups. You're a terrorist. I'm a terrorist, Bozell told host Maria Bartiromo Thursday. Anybody with the RNC is a terrorist. Anyone supporting or reading Breitbart is the Christian Broadcasting Network, For the Love of God, the Heritage Foundation, the most prestigious conservative think tank in America, have all now been targeted as associated to one degree or another with terrorism. On Mornings with Maria, the head of the conservative watchdog group detailed their new report, which found an Obama-era domestic terror prevention program reinstated by Biden has allegedly given $40 million to 80 recipients who put organizations like the Republican National Committee, Heritage Foundation, Turning Point USA in the same category as militant terror groups. The Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention Grant Program Bozell started to explain. This is supposed to find domestic terrorists in America. It was started by Obama. There was concern by Republicans that it would be weaponized against Republicans and conservatives. Trump put the kibosh to it. It's come back now under Biden. Media Research Center's president claimed the group reviewed related program documents and discovered one diagram from the University of Dayton of a four-tier pyramid where the top equals an increased level of extremism. The first and second bottom levels include Fox News, American Conservative Union Foundation, National Rifle Association, Jewish Broadcasting Service, Prager University, Make America Great Again, and more. At a conference where the pyramid of far right radicalization was dissected, Bozell also alleged that keynote speakers associated top Republican leaders with the Holocaust. One speaker was associated Ron DeSantis with the Holocaust. One speaker was associating Donald Trump with Pol Pot, the genocide guy. One speaker did this. One speaker did this. He advocated programs to deny people to shut down their websites, to close their meetings, and to physically prevent them from assembling in public. And again, I don't know if that's signs of things to come, but that's what it probably is. I think it's just only going to get worse and worse. Here's an update on the World Health Organization. Learned a little bit more, but this is a report from Michelle Bachmann, who's just, I think she was there. I think she was in Geneva.
Once.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And former Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann sounded the alarm on Monday, that would be the 22nd of May, about developments coming out of the World Health Assembly that suggest that the World Health Organization is intent on establishing, quote, a platform for global governance through healthcare in the wake of the global pandemic. On Sunday, the WHO kicked off its annual 10-day World Health Assembly in Geneva, Switzerland, described as, quote, the decision-making body of the World Health Organization. Concerns over the WHO's actions have been steadily building since the beginning of the pandemic, when observers noted that the WHO's deference to China arguably worsened the spread of COVID. In addition, observers are also pointing out that the Biden administration is working to enable the organization to, quote, centralize authority not just for pandemics, but for any health emergencies in the hands of the Director General, who read all that. Now Bachman says the current World Health Assembly is poised to increase the World Health Organization's mandate over the healthcare decisions of sovereign nations. There's a dual track process that they're following, she explained, during an on the ground report from Geneva on Monday's edition of Washington Watch with Tony Perkins. One is through a global pandemic treaty that they're calling an accord. I think somebody mentioned that last week. I think it was you, right? The second is through a package of about 300 amendments to the international health rules. Both lead to the same results. Both lead to the creation of a platform for global governance through healthcare, and it's a web that locks us in, the likes of which we've never seen before. She went on to report that there were no members of Congress there. She pointed out, I was actually shocked because this has been a big issue that a lot of their constituents have rightly been very concerned about. There was no American press there. So how would anyone even know what's going on unless they tuned in and they watched for themselves? We learned a lot about things in the last 3 years, haven't we? And the World Health Organization bungled almost everything, whether it was masks or vaccines or lockdowns, but yet they acted like nothing happened. There was no review. They acted like everything was just normal. Bachman then laid out the WH plans going forward. So things are going to look like they're the can's being kicked down the road a little bit from what I'm reading here. They're planning to meet in New York City in September. They'll go over the progress that they are going to make in January. They'll then give a final completed package of the 300 amendments together with a global pandemic treaty to the World Health Organization and the UN. Then they'll meet again in Geneva next February. But 1 year from this week, they will take the vote. So they haven't taken the vote yet, but that's coming a year from now. And so they intend to vote for a platform for global government and to give themselves the power that no one has ever seen before. And she goes on to say, I heard from Secretary Xavier, can't pronounce his name, but Sarah, he's the head of the Health and Human Services Department, who said he wants more biosurveillance. This is our Secretary of Health and Human Services. In other words, surveillance of our bodies. And then they want to share the data with everyone else in the world. This is highly invasive. They were very clear today. They want very bold language. They intend to have surveillance over every citizen on earth, and they intend to control us through health care. She goes on to say that WHO's agenda goes well beyond pandemics, so more on that later. But this shows how the government control is starting to take shape, and certainly ties in with Revelation 13 and Daniel 7 and many other scriptures that we're all at least somewhat familiar with. Talking about and this to me is so important, but this has to do with the United States current policy toward Israel. And we've talked a lot about that, but uh, Israel and the Saudis have been in talks about normalizing their relationship like others have through the Abraham Accords. And so this article is headline starts or is entitled U.S. Conditions Israel-Saudi Talks on Halt to Judicial Reform. Remember a while back that Israel was going through all those riots in the street over their proposed judicial reforms, which is strictly to take all the power away from the judiciary and allow the assembly or the Knesset to have the power that they're entitled to. So Washington demands restarting peace talks with the Palestinians. Who do we think we are to do that? We don't have a right to tell Saudi or to tell Israel through the Saudis or anybody else in exchange for advancing normalization efforts. The White House is demanding that Israel shelve its judicial reform plans in exchange for American support for a normalization agreement with the Saudi Arabia, according to Israeli media reports. So, the White House demanding Israel shelve it. This has nothing to do with us. That's an internal thing to Israel, and we're trying to tell Israel what to do. Washington, along with Riyadh, which is the capital of Saudi Arabia, is also conditioning advancement of the talks between Israel and Saudi Arabia. That's a condition, as mandated by Washington, uh, conditioning it based on the advancement of the talks on restarting long dormant negotiations with the Palestinians. Israeli lawmaker Danny Danon, chairman of the World Likud and former ambassador to the United Nations, criticized U.S. demands. We respect our friends in the U.S., but Israel's policy will be determined by us. Normalizing relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia is a regional interest, but we must not advance our relations in the wake of an ultimatum. Abraham Accords partner Bahrain has been brokering telephone diplomacy between Jerusalem and Saudi Arabia, coordinated a recent call between Netanyahu and Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to discuss normalization. So it's the very top of both countries. Prince Mohammed last week at the 2023 Arab League summit in Jeddah that stated that the Palestinians remain, quote, the central issue of the Arab countries and is at the top of the kingdom's priorities. So I think, as I mentioned last week, one of the conditions to engaging or getting involved in these normalization talks is that the parties acknowledge Israel's right to exist. But here we have kind of an underlying theme, again, around this whole Palestinian thing, which is ultimately designed to lead to the new state of Palestine. And I'm just going to read, I've read this a million times, but it's so important. Are your books in the same order as mine?
Kind of arranged mine. Oh, thank you.
I think you'll find it similar.
Okay, we've read this a number of times, but this is from the book of Joel. As we read, and we read things like, we will not delay in providing assistance to the Palestinian people in recovering. This is from the Saudi king or prince, in recovering their lands, restoring their, in other words, the Palestinians' legitimate rights, and establishing the independent state based on the 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as the capital of this new Palestinian state. Now, what's in East Jerusalem? Temple Mount. So here's all these different countries trying to convince Israel to, in the pre-67 borders, that was before the 1967 Six-Day War, before it was that the suggestion or the demand is that they go back to the borders before the Six-Day War, which is when they took the Golan Heights, Gaza, which they've since obviously turned over, and the so-called West Bank. So they're saying this new Palestinian state could be in what's known as the West Bank, which would make, and we said this before, Israel virtually defenseless. I was finish up this a little bit. Saudi Arabia is also reportedly laying out a series of demands for the United States. Our good president didn't do much in terms of relations with Saudi Arabia by calling it I forget, he had a very pejorative term that he used for Saudi Arabia. And then when we pulled out of Afghanistan, that really set in motion this whole de-dollarization thing. because Saudi Arabia, who agrees to trade in U.S. dollars for their oil, said, wait a minute, how do we know that the United States will be there to defend us? This was part of that agreement. In general, we support is this is Saudi Arabia, Israel's integration in the Middle East region, including normalization with Saudi Arabia, said this is a State Department, said U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price, without specifically commenting on the Israeli-Saudi negotiation reports, which he said Washington was aware of. So, yeah, Washington's very aware of it. In fact, they're trying to do some arm twisting through Saudi Arabia to convince Israel to come up with a new land, so or a new state within the current boundaries of Israel. I sent that map around the other day, and the land that God gave to the Jewish people as an everlasting, eternal inheritance is far greater. It actually extends from uh, the great river in Egypt, which is probably the Nile, up into Lebanon and even parts of Iraq. That's how much territory God has given to them. But now they're content with just a small piece of it. And remember that map that I passed around last week? That is just a tiny, tiny sliver, a tiny dot in the Middle East. And here's a world, including the United States, is trying to convince Israel to further divide that land. So here we read in Joel chapter 3, beginning in verse 1, in those days and at that time, again, a prophecy for the future, when I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, I will gather not some, but all nations, and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. So this is a prophecy about the battle of Armageddon, which occurs at the very end of the tribulation. We're not here for that. We're obviously in heaven. This happens afterwards. But then God goes on to say through the prophet Joel the reasons why he is going to is basically pour out his judgment. Then I will put them on trial. Who? The nations that he's about to judge. For what they did, I'm going to put them on trial for what they, the nations, did to my inheritance, my people Israel. And so he says right here, Israel is my people, they're my inheritance. Doesn't mean they're always going to lead a charmed life, and we know throughout history they have not. Because the nations, scattered my people among the nations and divided up my land. So there you have it right there, plain and simple. Two primary reasons, among others, that God is going to bring all the nations that are around at the time, not just some, but all of them, which would include whatever at that point in time, being all is all, would include the United States. So this is into the future. We don't know how far into the future, but this is going to happen. And so we read these articles and you just have to shake your head and say, what are these places, what are these people and these nations thinking? You know, it's just insane. And obviously, most of them, and you know, it kind of goes along with what we've been talking about with people moving away from biblical truth. They don't know, they don't understand, you know. And I don't know if I read, did I read this article last week? The meaning of from the river to the sea. I think I did. Palestine will be free.
I don't think so, no.
Well, if I did, it really made a big hit. Okay. The meaning, this is an article entitled, you hear this term a lot, and it's spouted by people that support the so-called, well, it's the Muslims that really spout this more than anybody else. But the title of this article is The Real Meaning of From the River to the Sea, Palestine Will Be Free. Now, anybody that thinks that the Arabs, the Muslims, the so-called Palestinians, which they're really not, but that's another story for another day, would be content with just a state within the within Israel wrong. It's not what their goal is. Their goal is to drive every Jew into the Mediterranean Sea. That's been stated over and over again. That's their objective. They're never going to be happy with that. The Hamas charter, which has never been changed, uh, basically says that. And if you look at any Arab Palestinian map, it does not include Israel. So
Mm.
here's some highlights of some points to think about when it comes to this mindset of from the river to the sea, etc. Anti-Israel students on many university campuses in the United States, Canada, Australia, and Europe often chant the slogan, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." This slogan, which basically means Israel has no right to exist on the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. In other words, all the land that currently makes up Israel has long been endorsed by Islamic groups that openly call for eliminating um, Israel. And I think we've talked a lot about the about Iran, for example, and the Shiites. The Shiites believe that the their their Messiah, if you will, is going to return, but only after they create chaos and destroy Israel. It's built into their religious views. The Muslims have two books. They have the Quran, then they have what's called the Hadith collections, which are allegedly the sayings of Muhammad. It's a collection of his sayings. And one of them is, and it's just full of anti-Semitism, obviously, but one of them is something to the effect that the end cannot come until the trees and the rocks cry out, "There's a Jew behind me, come and kill him." That's built into the Hadith collections. That's an actual saying. And if you read through the Quran, it talks about eliminating the people of the book, which are Jews and Christians. So, not a pretty sight. The same call has been repeated. A recent meeting at the University of Sydney Student Council, where Jewish students were obstructed from speaking or displaying Israeli flags on Israel's Independence Day by fellow council members. A rally on April 8th called, quote, "Hands Off Al-Aqsa Mosque." Now, Al-Aqsa Mosque is that dome, and there's a mosque beneath there on the Temple Mount. They call it the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That's what the Muslims call it. We call it Temple Mount. So Al-Aqsa Mosque comes from a term or a phrase in the Quran, which basically says that Al-Aqsa is a place of far off worship. It's not specifically identified. Remember, Muhammad, he was roaming the areas of Mecca and Medina, and he identified this third holiest site, but he didn't say specifically what it was. Interestingly, Jerusalem's not mentioned a single time in the Quran. It's not even mentioned. But since that time, after he passed, they came up with the idea that Muhammad, very late at night, got on this steed, which, as I recall, had the body of a horse and the face of a peacock or something like that. And he traveled from Medina and ended up in Jerusalem and tied his steed to the Temple Mount or some whatever what remnant was up there and ascended up and had a conversation with Allah. Never happened, obviously, but that's where this whole idea of Jerusalem becoming sacred to the Muslim people, at least the Shias and the Sunnis as well, but primarily the Shias, really originated. And there's no truth to it whatsoever. But you have to understand, and I think we all have to understand, just like with everything else that's going on, it's satanically motivated because they as well. You got the Rossi and the head clerics in Iran calling for the complete, not just in Israel, but worldwide, complete elimination of the Jews. And we've noted before why that is because Satan says he can't, or God says he won't come back until they, the Jews, acknowledge him. which will happen at the very end of the tribulation. So Satan does everything in his power to eliminate the Jews. An event hosted earlier this year by Jewish groups at the University College in London, so we just talked about Australia, where dozens of anti-Israel activists chanted, "Free Palestine from the river to the sea." We should be calling upon the Arab Muslim armies to liberate Palestine, one speaker at the anti-Israel gathering stated explicitly. Last year, the Jewish Community Center at Northwestern University in Chicago was shocked to see that printed copies of an op-ed piece about Jewish pride were turned into a big sign painted with the words, "From the river to the sea." It's impossible to imagine that anti-Israel activists have no idea this slogan is a common call to arms for those who want to destroy Israel. In the meantime, we've got our administration and others calling for further division of the state of Israel. This is all prophesied. All this anti-Semitism prophesied throughout the Bible, as far back as in Numbers. And we read that a couple weeks ago, where it said that they're not counted as among the nations. So it's impossible to imagine. Okay, the slogan reflects the wishes of Iran and its terror proxies, especially Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and Hezbollah, to replace Israel with a 57th Islamic state from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. In other words, to eliminate Israel altogether. Iranian leaders and officials have often repeated that their goal is to, quote, wipe Israel off the map. Recently, Iran's foreign ministry echoed the call by declaring that Jerusalem is the, quote, eternal capital of Palestine. There's never been any archaeological evidence whatsoever to support such a claim. But yet with Israel, it's as clear as the day is long. They've been there for over 3,000 years, from the river to the sea. Um, on the eve of a recent visit to Syria, Iranian President Raisi stated his regime's wish to see Israel removed from the face of the earth. And remember, this is Iran is one of those nations that we're learning about in Ezekiel 38 that'll join with Russia and Turkey, Libya and Sudan. Hamas, the Iranian-backed terror group controlling the Gaza Strip, has never missed an opportunity to declare its intention to deliver the same message. In December 2022, the 35th anniversary of its founding, Hamas unveiled its slogan, "Palestine from the river to the sea." A map accompanying the slogan depicted, "Without Israel, all the land from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea." By using this slogan, Iran and Hamas are saying bluntly, there is no room for a Jewish state in the Middle East. And it goes on from there. I'll just read Article 11 from the Hamas Charter was written, I think, in the mid 1960s when this whole Palestinian scam first started to come into effect. Article 11 of the Hamas Charter leaves no room for doubt. It is straightforwardly genocidal. Quote, the Islamic Republic movement, Hamas, believes the land of Israel is an Islamic waqf, which means under their administration, consecrated for future Muslim generations until Judgment Day. It or any part of it should not be squandered. It or any part of it, this is from the Hamas Charter, should not be given up. Neither a single Arab country nor all Arab countries, neither any king or president, nor all of the kings and presidents, neither any organization nor all of them, be they Palestinian or Arab, possess the right to do that. Article 13 of the Charter openly advocates the use of violence to kill Jews and eliminate Israel. There's no solution for the Palestinian equation except through jihad, which is also known as holy war. Article 15, jihad is the individual duty of every Muslim. It is necessary to instill the spirit of jihad in the heart of the nation. And it goes on and on and on from there. But the hatred of the Muslim world toward Israel is just it's eternal, it's satanic, and we're probably all listening to what's been going on over there the last several weeks with bombs just coming and or rockets coming from Gaza, one right after another. And I don't know if anybody listens to Amir Sarfati, but he came out with a pretty bleak update last week where he said that intelligence would indicate that Hezbollah, which has you hear anywhere from 125 to 200,000 rockets, missiles in Lebanon. Hezbollah is in Lebanon, ready to be launched into Israel. So they're apparently preparing. You well could see a preemptive attack. I mean, Israel's intelligence is second to none. So if there is something like that being planned, you can bet they know about it. And they're not going to sit back because apparently Hezbollah has claimed or stated they want to take prisoners, and kill as many as they can. I think their range is pretty much northern Israel, but there's still a lot of people up there. So it's getting so unbelievably crazy over there. I think seeing more activity in Israel with not just Iran, and of course Iran, they're afraid. They're afraid of really coming out right now. I think they're trying to build up enough might through nuclear weapons, but they freely use their what they call proxies. Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran. Hamas is a proxy of Iran. The Houthis are proxies of Iran. Islamic Jihad. Virtually all the terror groups are fully funded by Iran. Iran is funding the uprisings in Sudan, in Libya. They're all over the place, as is Russia, which is just gives us more to think about when it comes to Ezekiel 38. So let's get back into that. Let's go back to Ezekiel 38. Um, if we can wrap this up. Okay, I think I got a pretty good start on this last week, but let's um, just do an update here real quick, and we'll see if we can't get through more of this. But I think last week we got down about as far as verse 8 of Ezekiel 38. So Ezekiel 38:39. Now, obviously, as we've already seen, Ezekiel 38:39, the war that's being predicted here is requires that certain things happen. We saw that in Ezekiel 36 and 37. It requires that the Jews are back in the land. When Ezekiel wrote this, he was in captivity in Babylon. They were under Babylonian control at that time. Uh, but now the Jews are back in the land and they continue to return. I think last I heard was now they're up to about 50% of the world's Jewish population is back in Israel. There has to be mutual hatred of Israel by the nations that Ezekiel identifies. And those nations include the ones we were just talking about. They all have this from the sea to whatever mentality. Russia has to be a major world power. They are today. Now, obviously, Russia right now is engaged in the Ukraine war. Uh, I'm not sure we get the full picture as to what's going on over there, but we hear that Ukraine is about ready to mount an offensive. So who knows what's going to happen? But I can tell you this, based on what we read here, uh, Gog, which is the leader of this confederacy, will be very strong, which tells me that Russia's going to come out on top. When it comes to Ukraine, they have to. So a convergence of factors that make it, it's not a question of if this event's going to take place. It's a question of when. Now, I was reading, one of the guys I like to read, is a fellow by the name of Thomas Ice. I've heard him speak a bunch of times. He's a real biblical scholar. And I was reading some things he wrote today and trying to determine, one of the biggest arguments and one of the biggest things that people wonder about is when this event's going to take place in relation to the rapture and so on and so forth. And he concluded that he thinks it's going to happen after the rapture. And he also makes the case, see, when the rapture occurs and we're gone, there's nothing that says that, I mean, the rapture does not, as we said before, does not start the tribulation. It's not as though the rapture happens, then the tribulation starts. Because there's some things that have to take place. Antichrist has to come on the scene. So uh, it's conceivable that it could be weeks, months, maybe even years from the time of the rapture until the actual start of the tribulation to allow all these things to take place. I'm of the view, as is he, that Ezekiel 38 is going to happen after the rapture. It's possible it could happen before the rapture, or maybe at the time of the rapture. Who knows? But I think it's going to happen after the rapture takes place. Now, that's not to be dogmatic about it, because there's a lot of very good scholars that think it could happen at different times. But
What,
um,
what makes you say that you think it's got to come before the rapture?
I'll get into some of those reasons.
Okay.
But I think probably the primary one is where in Ezekiel we read that they're going to burn the weapons for 7 years.
Okay.
So it seems to me unlikely. It could carry into the beginning of the tribulation. But it also says that they will be living in security. They'll be living secure, not in peace necessarily, but Israel will be living in what they at least believe to be securely, that they're protected. And right now they have one of the strongest militaries in the world, so they feel pretty secure against whatever's coming. Uh, so if you get to the midpoint of the tribulation, which Jesus referred to as the Great Tribulation, that's when, during that period of time, two-thirds of the Jews will be killed. Antichrist he'll be in Jerusalem, he'll occupy Jerusalem, he'll be after the Jews with a vengeance. There is no way during that period of time that Israel will think they're secure. And so it takes us from at least the midpoint of the tribulation uh, back. So the question is, does it happen during the first half of the tribulation or before that? And I think for reasons that also, to me, make sense, that it would be probably before. Because as we see when we read through this, after after God destroys this confederacy, it's going to take 7 months for the Jews to bury the dead. And then it's going to take 7 years to burn the weapons that are left behind. So we'll get into that. So I think my feeling is it's before. Uh, some would say it's a post-tribulation thing. It happens at the very end of the tribulation, but that would mean burning weapons into the kingdom age for 7 years, and that makes no sense whatsoever to me. So uh, we don't know, and there's a lot of people that have a lot more knowledge and skill than I do that have different views. I believe that I think Mark Hitchcock believes that it happens early in the tribulation. He might be right, but uh, I don't know, for various reasons, I don't see that happening. But again, I'm not the expert. God is the one that knows. He's the one that will make that determination. Uh, so one of the arguments for pre-tribulation and against uh, the idea of it being Armageddon, at Armageddon, all nations are allied against Israel, Jerusalem. At at the Gog and Magog war, it's only certain nations. It's five of them that we know about. It's not all nations. So there's a clear distinction between Armageddon and Ezekiel 38. The Ezekiel invasion comes primarily from the north, When Armageddon takes place, it's going to be surrounding from all sides Jerusalem. Israel, or the Ezekiel invasion, as we'll see, is going to end by God Himself when He issues or causes a huge earthquake to take place, and then mass confusion, and they're going to turn on each other. And I just read today that during a war, surprisingly, that 20% of the fatalities are collateral damage on average. I didn't realize it was that high. But in this case, the collateral damage, as we'll see, is going to be much higher. The combatants that are going to be involved in this are going to be literally turning on each other. Um, so it's through the convulsions of nature and in God that Ezekiel 38 will end, as opposed to Jesus actually returning and ending the Battle of Armageddon. Moving over, um, the Russian invasion, as we'll see here, we'll go through some scriptures, has to happen while Israel's living securely in the land, or at least they think they're going to live securely. We talked about the nations that are form the coalition. We have Gog. Yeah, I'm on page 2 of the notes if you have those. And then we have Magog, which is Rosh, Meshach, Tubal, clearly Russia. And we have uh, possibly Kazakhstan and even the Afghanistan and other nations that could be a part of this. Rosh, which is not mentioned here specifically in the NIV, but it is in most other translations, is also referred to as Russia. Uh, Israel is often referred to as the center of the world, and I think it's around Ezekiel chapter 5 or something that Ezekiel literally refers to Israel as the as the navel of the world, right in the very middle. And so, if you take a map, or if you align, you draw straight north from Jerusalem, from Israel, you run smack dab into Russia. So clearly, Russia's a part of it. Tubal, Meshach, they settled that are also mentioned here, south of the Black Sea, and most think that they are names that were later changed to Moscow and Tobolsk. Then we have in verse 5 the nations that align with Gog, which we'll talk about. Iran, Persia. Iran was Persia until 1935. Then we know Togamara, Gomer, clearly are Turkey today, and we saw that Erdogan just won the election, and he's a scatterbrain, that guy. So let's Ethiopia, or Kush, which is mentioned here, is what we know today to be Sudan, and how crazy that is. Put is Libya, and so forth. So let's just go through and we'll try to explain this as we go along. Then I want to just go down to, well, let's just start at the beginning again, 38. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, set your face against Gog. And we know that Gog is a leader, uh, the leader of Russia. He's Gog of the land of Magog. So if Magog is Russia, which clearly it is, along with Meshach and Tubal, he's the chief prince, then he's the leader of Russia. And so that could be Vladimir Putin. If not, Putin, like we said before, is certainly Gog-esque, very much like Gog, so forth. So the chief prince of Meshach Tubal prophesy against him and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against you, Gog, chief prince of Meshach and Tubal. I will turn you around. In the Hebrew word there for, surprisingly, for turn around is the same that they use for repentance. It's to turn around and move in a different direction. And so God is going to put hooks in Gog's jaw, and as the leader of these various places, is going to pull him down toward the mountains of Israel. with the idea of attacking them. What we'll see in a moment is to come and we think to take a spoil. So the hook, the question many people ask, what's the hook? What's going to motivate um, Russia, God, to make this move? God is going to put, as we'll see in just a moment, thoughts in his mind and force him down. So we see very clearly as we go through this that all of this is orchestrated by God himself. He's doing it. And he's doing it for a very specific reason, which we'll see in a minute. I will turn you around, put hooks in your jaws, and bring you out with your whole army. And there's some verses in here. If you go back to the original Hebrew, that this confederacy is so big that you can't even see the ground. This is a massive, massive confederacy that's going to be coming against Israel. I will turn you around, put hooks in your jaws, and bring you out with your whole army, your horses, your horsemen, fully armed, and a great horde, with large and small shields, all of them brandishing their swords. Now, a lot of people try to say, well, this had to have happened before, happened in ancient times, because they're not going to use these types of weapons in a war today. There'll be tanks and who knows what else. And the common view is that Ezekiel, under God's inspiration, was writing to that time, and clearly the weapons that will be used are more contemporary. They're not going to be horses and that type of thing. All of them brandishing their swords or rifles. Persia, which we know is Iran, Cush, Sudan, Put will be with them, all with shields and helmets. So what's the one thing that Iran, Cush, and Put have? They're all Islamic nations. Let me just read a couple of things, some highlights for some articles. To see the connectivity between, say, Sudan. Here's um, an article entitled, this goes back to April 26th of this year. How Putin's, quote, cat paw sunk into Sudan. Sudan a year ago was ready to enter into a normalization agreement with Israel. But since then, there's been a coup and a civil war that's taken place over there. It goes on to say, on the day before Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine a year ago, a top general from Sudan was visiting Moscow. Um, he had made a name for himself leading one of the so-called Janjaweed militias that helped carry out a genocide in Sudan's Darfur region. And it goes on to say that now, according to a CNN investigation, the Wagner Group, which is a mercenary military group that supports Russia, is helping arm the Galos RSF, which is this military group that's attempting to create all this havoc in Sudan, with surface-to-air missiles as they battle the Sudanese National Army. Now, my point of bringing this up is that uh, things were going along swimmingly. Everything looked good a year ago in Sudan, particularly as far as Israel is concerned. Now, they're back to where they were before, and we have this connection with Russia. It's just not a coincidence that Russia is so actively involved with Sudan. There's a lot more to this article, but the important part is that Russia has a hand in what's going on in Sudan, as does Iran. So you see this connection. And then here's another one. Even if another civil war is averted, the delay in signing a peace agreement has provided room for the rise of political factions that oppose further relations with Israel. So here's within Sudan itself groups that are opposed to any kind of relations with Israel. So you can basically say this whole move by Sudan, which is a nasty place, is off the table. And we have Russia and Iran both mucking around over there. Conclusion: the 2.5 year delay in converting the normalization declaration into a signed peace agreement, which is between Sudan and Israel, appears to have put the entire process at risk. Even if Sudan forms a civilian government in the near future, it may prove reluctant to test the public mood by concluding a treaty with the quote Zionist enemy. So there's just one more player that's in place. And then, as far as Turkey is concerned, another big player in this, Erdogan, the leader of Turkey, to Iran's Raisi, the main player, Russia, Turkey, Iran. So Erdogan to Iran, the Islamic world should unite against Israeli attacks. I think I might have read that last week. So we see the involvement of Turkey and Iran very prominent. And here's another one. Iran's Raisi, the leader of Iran, meets with top Hamas and Islamic Jihad officials, urges Israel's defeat. We all know that Iran hates Israel. And Hamas, which is the group in Gaza, as well as Islamic Jihad, that's being fueled and funded by Iran, everything that they're doing. So we have this hatred that's doing that. And then here's Iran kickstarts a multi-front Middle East war against Israel. Um, so, they're gonna plan that. And the multi-front war is having them surrounded by all these enemies with Islamic Jihad, Hamas, and Hezbollah, all their proxies. And then we've got this. I think I talked about this last week. Is Syria, Russia, Turkey, and Iran hold high-level talks in Moscow. You can't make this stuff up. Ezekiel, 2,600 years ago, sees exactly what's unfolding right before our eyes today. So the evidence is there, and there's so much more we could say to confirm it. But suffice it to say that clearly what's being prophesied here is coming together so quickly. Her,
Can I make a comment? Couple hours ago, I read from Amir Safati that the general in charge of the U.S. Central Command is right now meeting with one of the key generals of the IDF
Yeah.
in Israel.
right, I heard that.
And their conversation was about, I found this is the interesting part that I found, was about that the northern parts of Israel, I forgot how they described it, their mayors have made sure that all of their underground bomb shelters
Right.
are
Right.
ready.
Yeah.
Because there's fear that, this is interesting, if Israel strikes first,
Mhm.
there would be rapid retaliation from Lebanon or
Hezbollah.
even from Hezbollah as a proxy for Iran.
Right.
But
Yeah.
that's on the notion that Israel attacks first,
Right.
preemptively.
Yeah. It depends on the intelligence. If the intelligence says that Hezbollah is about to do something big, they will. And as Amir said in another update, he says, we always try to make sure that we're only going after the terrorists. He says, but if we have to, we're not going to be knocking on their roof saying we're coming. But this is a new ballgame. This is existential. Israel is under an existential threat. Persia, Cush, Put, will all be with them with their shields and helmets. Also Gomer, Turkey, with all its troops. Beth Togarmah, which is also Turkey. From the far north with all its troops, the many nations with you. With who? With Gog, with Russia. Get ready, be prepared, you and all the hordes. And that all the hordes, it's just going to be, it's a huge, huge number of troops that are going to move gathered about you and take command of them. So say to yourself, well, why would they do it? And they do it because God is going to bring them down. He's the one that's orchestrating this whole thing. And he's using enemies of Israel to do it. After many days, that's verse 8, which is a clear reference to the last days, not during Ezekiel's time. This is not prophesied. If we look back in history, no such event involving these nations has ever occurred. But today we're seeing it come together. You will be called to arms in future years. There it is again. You will invade a land that has recovered from war. We read that last week. Whose people were gathered from many nations. That's Ezekiel 36, 37. and to the edge of the mountains of Israel. That's on the northern border, which had long been desolate. We know that prophesied in Jeremiah and Deuteronomy throughout the Old Testament that Israel would be desolate, and we know that to be the case. But it's since just the early 20th century and beyond that they've really recovered it. Um, they had been long desolate. They had been brought out from the nations, and now all of them live in safety. It doesn't say peace. You and all your troops and the many nations with you will go up, advancing like a storm. You will be like a cloud covering the land. So this is Russia, the military forces from Russia, Iran, Turkey, and the other two moving on Israel. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Again, on that day, thoughts will come into your mind and you will devise an evil scheme. So he's talking about God. He's going to put the hook in his jaw, and then God's going to put a thought, and then he's going to devise an evil scheme. You will say, I will invade a land of unwalled villages. Back when this was written, uh, all of the countries, the nations, the cities surrounded themselves by walls to protect themselves from marauders and invaders. Now, granted, there's still walls up, and I love these people that say that all these walls have to come down before this happens. No, that's a different scenario. I mean, these walls are still there, like the Wailing Wall and other things, but that's not what we're talking about. The walls have basically come down. All of them living without walls, without gates and bars. I will plunder and loot and turn my hand against the resettled ruins, um, which is what's happened with Israel. Think about that since 1948, how they've resettled. And people gathered from where? From all the nations. Israel Jews have come back from 70 different nations. Never lost their heritage, never lost their identity. Rich in livestock and goods. Right now, Israel is one of the richest nations in the world. Their GDP is way above what ours is because of their technology. And where did I read that something like 40% of all Nobel Prizes or Pulitzer Prizes are Jews? I mean, yes,
Say that their GDP is greater than the US.
yeah, on a per capita basis.
Oh, on a per
Yeah,
capita
yeah.
basis. Oh, okay.
Rich in livestock and goods, living at the center of the land. Sheba and Dedan. Now we know who they are. Sheba and Dedan are Arab nations. That's Saudi Arabia and the nations in the Arabian Peninsula. This is an interesting one. And the merchants of Tarshish and all of her villages will say to you, have you come to take a plunder? And in some translations, it's a spoil. Have you gathered your hoards to loot? To carry off silver and gold, to take away livestock and goods, and to seize much plunder. So, what we have here are these nations, which would be the Arabian Peninsula, Saudi Arabia. We'll talk a little bit about Tarshish in a moment, but these are nations that basically express concern. They're not willing to defend Israel, but they're basically asking Gog and this confession, why are you doing this? What's the reason? Just yeah,
Isn't it true though that Israel now is following God and
no,
they're not?
no, no, no. Israel, the Jews in Israel, for the most part, are not believers in Jesus Christ. That's the key. They have to be believers in Jesus Christ. They're a lot of atheism, a lot of orthodoxy, a lot of secular Jews. No. And that's, remember, we said when we went through Ezekiel 36, 37, they have to come back in unbelief, which is the state that the majority of the Jews in Israel are in, unbelief, which they're not like us. They have not yet accepted Christ. But that's what the tribulation is all about. During the tribulation, they're going to be persecuted like they've never been persecuted. At the very end of the tribulation, there'll be a remnant of Jews that will accept Christ when he comes back. probably around a third of that. So no, not right now. No.
So Amir and them don't believe.
No, mayor does.
No, Amir does. That doesn't mean,
Some do, that's.
yeah. Oh,
but
there are
it's
certainly,
beginning to grow more and
yeah,
more.
the Christianity is, well, yeah, it's
That's-
a little
that's
bit, but
Not-
not, yeah, yeah. It doesn't mean there's not Christians there. Yeah, there certainly are. Yeah.
Oh, I don't remember this was a number of, but the number was in the low single digits, like 3 or 4% of Israelis practicing. I don't remember if it was Christians or Jews. I think it might have been of Judaism even.
Yeah,
But it's a
it could be.
very
I'm
small
not sure on that,
percentage,
John.
and so
Yeah.
Christianity is even less than that.
Right. Yeah, I
Though it's practicing
think it
Christians
might be a
within it.
little higher than that. There's a lot of Orthodox Jews there, but I don't know what the percentage is. There would be something that'd probably be pretty easy to look up.
Amir is a messianic, right? I mean,
Yeah, right. A Messianic Jew is simply a Jewish person that's accepted Christ.
Bob,
Born.
when we went to Israel, how many Christians did we run into? You were there.
Well, how many could you? It could have been 100 or 200 or
No.
1,000, but that's a small
I
percentage.
don't remember. Well, certainly there was David, and there were people,
Well,
other
David
people.
was the leader.
Yeah, but yeah. So, but for the most part, they are not. John's right. So, and that's the purpose of the tribulation. Remember, Jesus go all the way back to the Abrahamic covenant when God made all those promises, including that he will be their God, but he's not yet. So, in the meantime, man, we're living right now in the church age, the age of grace, which has been the time when Jesus has been building his church, which is primarily Gentiles. And during this last 2,000 years, uh, the many of the Jews are blinded to the truth
Mhm.
because of their rebellion against God and their rejection of their Messiah. But those blinders will come off, at least for the remnant, for that one third. Yeah? Three types of Jews. There's believing Jews, there's non-believing Jews, and the 144,000. That's the three types of Jews we have, or will have. The 144,000 we read about in Revelation 7 will be basically, and it says in verse uh, or chapter 14, there will be single men who will be very much committed to Christ. They'll probably all have a Paul-like experience, Damascus Road experience. They're the ones that are going to go out and at least initially preach the gospel during the tribulation. So early in the tribulation, you have at least that 144 that God will identify, and they will go out and preach. So we have this group that will that will just basically say, I don't know why you're doing this. We don't approve, but we're not going to come. We're not going to get militarily involved. And if you think about the Abraham Accords, and right now, the benefit to the Arab nations by having normalization agreements with Israel is pretty significant, financially, economically. So they have a tremendous interest, but they're not going to come. Tarshish, that's always a bone of contention as to what it really means. Tarshish is an area in Spain, or at least was in that time, but many think it extended up into Great Britain and all her villages, which would be basically the offspring. Some say that the United States could fall into that category as an offspring of Tarshish when they left Europe and came over here. And that would make sense. Right now, I'm not sure if Israel was attacked by this Confederacy that the United States would jump to their aid. I don't think they would. I don't think we would. And so they would be right there with Sheba and Dedan saying, why are you doing this? Have you come to take a plunder? So it's kind of a rhetorical question. It comes to why, what's that hook? What are you coming for? The minerals in the Dead Sea that Israel possesses are unbelievable. So maybe it's the Dead Sea minerals, maybe it's gas, maybe it's oil, maybe it's just the money they have. Who knows? It's even been reported that Solomon's gold, which tons and tons and tons that he had during his reign, may have been discovered. Who knows? So there's going to be something. I don't know what it's going to be. I think in all likelihood, it seems to make sense that Israel's natural gas supply is something that could have a big impact on Russia as they try to sanction so many other countries. But we'll see. That's something that God's going to put into them. Um, are you coming to take gold to take away livestock and goods? Therefore, Son of Man, this is again God speaking to Ezekiel. He often refers to him as Son of Man, and prophesy and say to Gog, this is what the sovereign Lord says. In that day, when my people are living in safety, will you not take notice of it? So we're in that day. They're back in the land. They're coming back. They continue to come back. You will come from your place in the far north, Gog, and you and many nations with you, all of them riding horses, a great horde, a mighty army. You will advance against my people Israel, like a cloud that covers the land. In days to come, Gog, I will bring you against my land. Notice who's doing it. It's God who's doing it. So that the nations may know me when I am proved holy through you before there are. So there's the reason. God is going to do such an amazing, miraculous thing that the nations are going to recognize that He is the one that did it. This is what the sovereign Lord says: You are the one I spoke of in the former days, by my servants, the prophets of Israel. At that time they prophesied for years that I would bring you against them, speaking to Gog. This is what will happen in that day when Gog attacks the land of Israel. My hot anger, don't let anybody ever say that God doesn't get angry. He does, declares the sovereign Lord. In my zeal, my fiery wrath, I declare at that time. So this is what happens. This confederacy's moving toward the mountains, and then there's going to be a great earthquake in the land. I think it's going to be probably like an 8 or a 9 on the Richter scale. It's going to be a major earthquake. The fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the beasts in the field, every creature that moves along the ground, and all the people on the face of the earth will tremble at my presence. So here's God through, and he always reveals himself, or often reveals himself through the nation of Israel. And so here's Israel, and I don't know, in terms of an announcement or knowing that this movement's coming. I don't know how much time there's going to be, how much they'll know, but it's going to be probably the one time that Israel will, with this confederacy coming against them, will not be able to defend themselves, unlike they are now. The mountains will be overturned, the cliffs will crumble, and every wall will fall to the ground. I will summon a sword against Gog. So this says that Gog himself, the leader of Russia, and if it were to happen tomorrow, it would have to be Putin, will be a part of this invasion. On my mountains, declares the on my mountains, which is the Golan Heights to the north of Israel. Every man's sword will be against one another. So here's the collateral damage. Here's this confederacy through all this confusion with the fire and brimstone and the earthquakes and everything else. They're literally going to be fighting against each other. And it's not the IDF, it's not the Israeli Defense Forces that are doing this. It's God Himself. I will execute judgment on him with plague and bloodshed. I will pour down torrents of rains, hailstorms, burning sulfur. So imagine, here comes this confederacy. And then there's a great earthquake. Then the soldiers just turn on each other, shoot each other. And then there's fire and brimstone. It's not Israel's military that's doing it. And I will show my greatness and my holiness, and I will make myself known in the sight of many nations. They will know that I am the Lord. So God is going to get to the point where he's just kind of had it with all these enemies of Israel. He's going to bring them all together, many of them, going to pull them under the leadership of the leader, whatever, of Russia, pull them down, and then just rain havoc upon them. I get the impression, I've heard others say that they don't think a single drop of Israeli blood will be shed. I find that kind of hard to believe, but it's not as though if Israel were to defend themselves or to drop a nuclear bomb or do something, then that would take away from what God's doing. And God's not going to allow them to do anything to defend themselves so that he can prove who he is. So this takes place, and think about this. Once this is done, we get into the next chapter. We'll see that 5/6 of this confederacy is wiped out. And it says that it's going to take 7 years just to bury the dead. And there's a lot of Jewish reasons for that. Why is it going to take so long? Well, they're going to be on the mountains, so the bones and the bodies are going to be falling into crevasses. But Jewish law requires that every single body be buried. And so they'll bury everyone. It also says that I am going to turn over these bodies to the birds and the carrion, the buzzards and whatever other kind of birds will come and feast on all these corpses that are going to be left. And so God's not going to allow Israel to lift a hand because it's got to be all about him. So here it is, and you think about it seems so far-fetched. It seems like, well, this is crazy. How can this happen? But you look at what's going on over there right now. You look at the fact that for the first time in history, you have Iran, Russia, and Turkey, all with a foothold in Syria, which is where? North of Israel. And all of this, in fact, when you look at the growing relationship, which could be the hook between Iran and Russia in the Ukraine, with Iran supplying all the drones and military support to Russia. So maybe, just maybe, the hook could be when the war is over, Ukraine is done, that Iran says, look at, we just want you to do this one thing for us. We want to wipe out Israel. We know you don't have a big love for Israel, so we want to move. Maybe that's the hook. Maybe Iran does something to trigger. We don't know. So, but it's coming together. It's all happening. And so people wonder, when is it going to happen? Well, we're not sure. Again, I believe it's before the rapture. It could be after. Who knows? We just don't know. But what we know is that we're so close because we're seeing this amazing, amazing prophecy coming together. It's just the right time. It's just this time with everything else that's going on. It's just one more piece of the puzzle. So hold on to your hats.
Right.
A lot of
Yeah, we are ready.
questions?
Um, is there not gonna be a gap between the rapture and the beginning of tribulation because the chaos that ensues,
Right.
the recovery they're gonna have to go through and all the therapy and all the meltdowns and all the crapola.
Could be a lot of crap.
How are they gonna get back to normal without a couple of years?
Right.
Not even normal.
Yeah.
You
No,
know,
I think
which-
I think you're right. I do think you're
So
right.
that chaos, and out of that chaos,
And
I'm using
but
my
the thing of it is, it's going to be so bad. Imagine
Yeah.
the church is gone,
yeah,
and we're right now. We're the restrainer. We're the restraining
Yeah.
force. It's the Holy Spirit through us that's holding
Right.
back the full force. And Satan or Antichrist cannot be revealed until we're gone.
well, they're gonna be open to it because he's gonna bring order out of.
Yeah,
it.
exactly. Exactly.
That's the strategy, create the chaos and then, offer, I'll make everything work.
Right.
Yeah, so they'll fall right into.
But with the church gone, there'll never be a normal, like we think of normal now, right?
No.
It'll never return to what.
No.
Yeah.
No.
It
You
might be
think of the
some
church.
semblance of
Yeah.
peace.
You think of the church.
The world will wake up
Yeah. The local will be awake.
And one other thing, Amir talks about keep your eye on Damascus. Because, I'm thinking, well, there's gotta be weapons of mass destruction buried under there, so when Israel hits Damascus, the place is gonna blow up with all the buried, Saddam Hussein. That's,
Yeah, and
That's
what
a
Helga's
theory.
talking about, there's a
that's a
prophet,
theory, but I think it sounds good.
there's one prophecy, there's actually a couple of prophecies, but the
Yeah.
most prominent one about Damascus is in
Yeah.
Isaiah chapter 17, verse 1, which basically says that Damascus will be an uninhabitable heap, never to be inhabited again. That has never happened, although there are those that say, well, it did happen, but who knows? I mean, those are one of those peripheral. I think it's probably going to happen maybe slightly before the attack on the Ezekiel 38 attack, but we just don't know for sure.
I mean, that would start everything, especially if
It could.
it's Israel that
Right. Yeah, if
does
they
the
did it.
first strike.
Well,
They hit a depot or something.
Yeah.
Cause there's talk that Russia's moving nuclear weapons
Yeah.
around right now, so.
Maybe the rapture will happen at the same time, so they'll be.
Not ready to end, are we?
Excited to-
Huh? We're not ending now, are we?
no, I'm just saying, I'm hearing that.
Disintegrated.
How many? Five.
Yeah, but the alien stuff.
But-
Yeah, all right,
Okay.
I can't wait to see how they blame us away.
You just said it.
Okay, just as a reminder, next week we're going to watch the movie.
Yeah.
We'll be in the media room, which is right over there somewhere.
Better be on time.
And I know many have seen it, but
Helga.
we'll gather at 6:30.
Yeah.
We'll introduce the movie a little bit, and for those that are on YouTube, if you know of others that maybe haven't joined in, we can't show it on YouTube, so they'll have to show up.
Oh,
Do we have any other classes after that, after next
I have
week?
one more at least. Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah,
You've gotta finish Ezekiel.
Let's leave it.
yeah. That's right. We can't just leave that hanging.
Get evacuated.
Exactly.
Okay, Father, we just
Evacuation.
thank you for this time, Lord, and your word is just so true. And we know, Lord, that this event is not a question of if, it's a question of when, and we can see the pieces being put into place. We thank you, Lord. We give you glory and honor. Lord, we all acknowledge that we're sinners and we fall so far short because of what you've done for us. We have eternal security, which is just beyond our comprehension, Lord. It's just so fantastic and so fabulous. So we just thank you for that. I pray for everyone here, Lord, for our families, and just ask that you bless us, bring us back. We pray for those that we're talking to and hopefully witnessing to, and that there can be a move of the Spirit, Lord, before the rapture comes, and that many of our loved ones and friends can come to know you. And we pray for all these things in the name of our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.